I want to take a second really just to anyone who knows me who's here listening and doesn't know Dr. Zach Bush as much, I have such respect and admiration for the energy you put in the world, because you're a leader. And I've been telling a few people in my community lately that, I really feel that you could be like an Elon Musk of the natural medicine and the farming. And man, you just got such a way of articulating biology, organic produce, Mother Earth, and science that I don't think I've ever heard anyone else be able to articulate.
Yeah,
and when I listen
kind of...
yeah, I really believe it. I even hear other doctors talking with you, and I'm like, can they keep up with, can they hang with Bush right now? He's got some skills, man, and I just think you're such a blessing to this world to come out, and I think that you've got a lot of integrity around your mission statement. And I want to take today to really let everyone share in your energy and what you can do, and then the solutions you've been able to create, and the root cause issues you've been able to identify beyond marketing and beyond branding and beyond finances, and just real root cause issues.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that the exciting thing, and this COVID thing is certainly underlining the opportunity that we have. The stress of the ecosystem is why this thing has happened. And so we actually had never seen a virus jump species before 1976. So that was the first year we saw swine flu, shift into the human experience in a big way. And since then, we've had 12,800 outbreaks of these big viral shifts that develop regional or global pandemics. 12,800 since 1976. You can tell that our current situation is not new. It's being repeated constantly. Many times a year, we're seeing viruses pass around the planet, and there's an exciting opportunity for us to ask a root cause question: is how did this happen, and why does it keep happening, and why is it a new phenomenon as of 1976?
Mm-hmm.
And from a science standpoint, there's a real massive transformative event happening right now as we start to understand something that's now being called the biome, similar to the microbiome. But the biome is probably the appropriate term, because we've for too long been considering viruses in the same category of the germ concept of bacteria and fungi. Bacteria and fungi are living organisms that can produce energy, they can reproduce, they can live in ecosystems, they have a consciousness to them, they can do something called quorum sensing, where they can do hyper-intelligent reaction to the environment. And viruses do not participate in that. Viruses are non-living entities. They have no fuel production, they can't reproduce. Viruses are literally just genomic packages of information. And so the viruses are actually the communication network of the microbiome and the macrobiome. And so the way in which bacteria talks to the human body is through bacteriophage, which are viruses, i.e. genetic packages that will go into a bacteria. The bacteria will pump out billions of copies of that piece of genetic data in the form of RNA or DNA, and then that can be absorbed by our body. And then we take up that genetic information, and we can then exude that from our bodies. And so there's no such thing as like a swine virus that goes and epidemic in humans. There's genetic information that may have originated in swine, but it's now become a human message. Humans are producing every virus that will become pandemic. We produce those from our own cells. And so the concept of creating a vaccine against this is ludicrous, because there is no living entity to fight against. And there's mounting evidence over the last 30, 40 years in the HIV and Hep C world that we understand that there is no antibody against HIV that keeps it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that actually keeps HIV in a quiescent, non-threatening, non-clinical state is actually an enzyme that chops up DNA of viruses.
Mm.
And so the immune system, our concept of it, needs to mature just as our concept of germs or viruses needs to mature.
Mm-hmm.
You can't put on a mask to protect yourself from a virus. Viruses are ever present.
Mm-hmm.
And they're part of your biology. They are actually, I would call, one of the most important aspects of your immune system is the genetic information.
Mm-hmm.
We know that if we vaccinate you against flu, your risk of getting coronavirus goes up. And so there is a really interesting, understanding that we need to adapt to of, wow, when we get a genetic update from a virus and we mount an intrinsic response to that, it's updating our response to the entire environment, not just that virus.
Yeah.
So if we disrupt your ability to interact naturally with, anything that we're vaccinating against, we have the risk of really disrupting your biology. Autoimmune disease cranks up every time. And so we're just in this very limited, belief system right now around what is the microbiome? Is it really against us? If it's not against us, then what does healthy immunity and vaccination plans really look like? How do we start to adapt our vaccine theory to the new knowledge of microbiomes, ecosystems, genomics, and the rest?
Dr. Bush, what exactly is the microbiome and why is it so important to our health?
Awesome. Microbiome is probably one of the most misunderstood nomenclatures in the public press as well as in physician science groups. We think of it largely as bacteria, and so the probiotic industry did one good thing, which was to advance the idea that there was good bacteria. The huge downside of the probiotic, era that we just have lived through is that by saying that there's good bacteria, it inherently suggests that there's bad bacteria. And that's the new paradigm that we have to get used to, is there is no bad bacteria. There's only biodiversity, and it's always right. Biodiversity, when it shows up, is going to always show up on purpose to create more biodiversity and to promote life. If we oppose that microbiome, bacteria being an example of this with antibiotics, for example, the bacterial microbiome has to adapt and it has to change. And so we see the phenomenon as you narrow the microbiome in a hospital, for example, you force genetic shift to happen in those few species that are surviving to become antimicrobial resistant. And so now we have, Medicare funding taken away from hospitals because infection rates are so high in a hospital now, not with the infection you went in with, the infection you came out with. It's because we've forced these, drastic adaptations of the microbiology through the collapse of biodiversity. And so in a nutshell, the microbiome describes an extremely complex ecosystem of small living life forms, which include bacteria, but then fungi way outstrip that, and parasites are between the two. In the bacterial world, you've got like 30 to 40,000 species that, are probably still scratching the surface. We may have 100, 400,000, who knows, but we know there's at least 30,000 species that are significant for human health. Parasites, you're at 300,000 species of parasites that live in and around human beings in our experience, and not just in the gut where they get attention. We have these little weird worms that live under our eyelids, for example, that are important in preventing eye disease. We are just surrounded by these bugs that we would call parasites, 300,000 species. And then in the fungal world, we're at 5 million species. And so that's an extraordinary biodiversity on the species level. But then if you look at it genetically, it truly blows the mind. The human only has 20,000 genes that would code for a human body. 20,000 genes is an extremely small number in nature because we know that the fruit fly has 13,000 genes. And the flea has 30,000 genes. So you sit somewhere between a flea and a fruit fly in genetic complexity. And, if you're married, your spouse is probably like, I told you so. But, you've got that kind of simplicity genetically. But then if we look to the microbiome that you carry, there's 2 million genes. And if we look to the parasites, there's 2 billion genes. And if we look to the fungi, it's 125 trillion genes. And so the fact that you're a pixel of genetic information. And so when we say microbiome, we're describing an ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, parasites that are a sea of genetic intelligence that is doing the work that makes your life possible.
So for the everyday person, it's kind of like, what's the simple takeaway from this question? Is that the microbiome is so diverse and so perfect. And really what we need to do is get back in touch with Mother Earth and stop trying to control it. Stop trying to micromanage it and really just get back into its loving grip.
So the solution is get back in touch. And it can be, such an easy reconnect on so many levels. And the hashtag Breathe Your Biome, if you haven't checked that out, it's a great campaign where people all over the world are taking pictures of their children and themselves out doing crazy cool things in nature. I love them. We've got pictures of people with giraffes and pulling off waterfalls. It's just like the most wonderful picture of what humanity would look like if we woke up every day saying, how can I re-engage nature today? And so the concept of breathe your biome is that food is a very small part in which we interact with the microbial life around us.
Mm-hmm.
We think of probiotics, but that's just probiotics are actually a very bad idea from a health standpoint in the sense that they're narrowing your microbiome down to 3 species.
Mm-hmm.
You want 30,000 species of bacteria, 300,000 species of parasites, 5 million species of fungi. That's your real macro ecosystem. If you're putting in billions of copies of 3 species into your gut every day with a probiotic, you're narrowing that. And some amazing studies that came out in 2018, published in the peer-reviewed science of the journal Cell, demonstrated that after 2 weeks of antibiotics, you lose about 80% of your microbiome diversity.
Mm.
If you then start a probiotic, it keeps that suppression at the same level as the antibiotic,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't recover.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take a probiotic, within 30 days, you're back to normal.
Mm.
And so the probiotic really showed itself to be a brakes on the system of biodiversification because it's obvious. It's very much like what we did in the Corn Belt, which is we destroyed 97% of the grasslands of North America, and we put in corn, soybean, and sugarcane, sugar beet.
Yeah.
And so when we did that, we destroyed the ecology of the soils. We went to this microecosystem. We do the same thing in a hospital. We destroy through, alcohol, hand sanitizers, every sterilization technique known to mankind. And we end up with 3 or 5 species of very invasive, bacteria that have had to adapt to this toxic environment. We're doing the same thing to the gut when we take 3 species. So we need to release that gut, and we need nature to inform our recovery. And in those publications in Cell, it showed that if you allow the humans back into their natural environment, within 30 days, they're back to normal. And so we need to take that and say, well, those were people that weren't even empowered with the information that they could diversify quicker.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity in your household, what does this look like? It certainly means know your food system. So grow a little bit of food out back. If you don't have a backyard garden, let me show you my little situation here. I just live in a condo here.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I just planted our farmer's fingerprint. Farmer's footprint is our non-profit, but we didn't feel like this was big enough to mandate a footprint. So this is our farmer's fingerprint.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've got, beets, we got carrots, kale, lettuces, cilantro, tomatoes, Hawaiian hot pepper, and basil, garlic chives, and mint, all growing in just a tiny little space. And so it takes so little to start to re-engage nature and say, this is what we're going to do is start to look to that template. And so grow a little bit of food in your, if you don't even have a deck, then do it in your window and grow a mint plant. You can't stop it.
That story you have with that woman with cancer, I mean, that is a spot on point. Can you share that with everyone about that? Just give them an example of diversity.
Yeah, so this woman was the first patient that we put onto what's now become a big consumer product out there, which was originally called Restore. Now it's called Ion Biome. Mm-hmm. But it's just a liquid supplement there, a couple bottles of that.
I love
it. She was the first patient to get this. And so at the time, my marketing department was my Sharpie marker. And I just had a white bottle, and I write, take 1 tablespoon 3 to 5 times a day. And so she was a 58-year-old woman who weighed 58 pounds. She's the thinnest woman I've ever seen. Amazingly, she was admitted to my hospice service. She was thought to have only a few weeks left of life. And my hospice nurse, when she admitted her, texted me, was like, you have to come meet this woman. I didn't meet every patient admitted to our hospice place because they were being admitted about 80 a week. And so I would see a small handful of those on a weekly basis. And so I was like, all right, I'll go by her house and meet her. And she said, 59-year-old, 59 pounds, pancreatic cancer, end stage, failed chemo 3 times, blah, 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 whole story. And I go and I knock on this door expecting a family member or something. And she answers the door herself. She's running this, still has her own household. She's living alone in a big 3-bedroom house in Charlottesville, Virginia. Beautiful home. She welcomes me in with this huge, giant smile, bright blue eyes. Other than the fact that she looked like a literal walking skeleton, you could see all of the skeletal structure of her skull. Just startling, weight loss. Not a single molecule of fat left in this woman's body.
Yeah.
As she had kind of digested her own body over the last 6 months because she hadn't been able to eat in 6 months. And so you mentioned the white chalk stools, which is a common scenario when a patient has been NPO and they can't eat anything for a long period of time, and their main chemical management is in chemotherapy and antibiotics. We sterilize their gut completely, and so the only thing they pass is the epithelial lining of their gut every 3 days. You pass about a finger's size of white chalk, and that's just dead epithelial cells that are passing. So she had white chalk stools for many months before this, and she was swabbing her mouth with water because she couldn't even swallow water at any volume without vomiting. She had a complete bowel obstruction from the pancreatic cancer that had advanced in her belly. So I just had her, start taking this brown liquid. We extract this from fossil soil, 60 million year old soil, and there's no microbes in it. It is a sterile product that is extracted the communication network between bacteria and fungi. Mm-hmm. And so all I did was give her a communication network. It's totally sterile. She lives in this sterile home, can't go outside. She was moving around the house fine, but too weak to go outside. She called me bawling 4 days later, like just absolutely, crying so hard she couldn't talk. I thought she was dying. I said, don't worry. I've just texted my nurse. We'll be there within 15 minutes. There's morphine in your refrigerator in the kit that we left you. You can take that orally. I was like, I get there, and it turns out she wasn't at all. She was so overwhelmed with joy because she had just had her first brown bowel movement in a year.
Wow.
And she was so excited she couldn't talk, and she was just in tears. And I couldn't figure that out. So I went home. That was a Friday afternoon. I went home and thought all weekend, like, how is it possible? And so I went back Monday, and I was like, I don't know. I have no idea how the microbes showed up in 4 days, because you're limited to this air-conditioned house. You can't eat anything. You're taking a sterile liquid. And the whole time I'm trying to talk to her dog keeps jumping in my lap, this annoying little white lap dog. And it's like so annoyed by this little poodle-like thing. And then suddenly like jumps up in my face, licks my tongue. And I'm just like, that's the grossest thing. And then I'm like, oh my God, you are the source. You brought in the bacteria. You brought in the microbiome. And it was this aha moment of, here's this dog going out as almost like this, life pod, spaceship out into the great ecosystem for this woman, and bringing it in constantly from the backyard for her. And as soon as she had the communication network in her gut, she suddenly was able to grab that bacteria. And within, less than 3 weeks, she was eating full-scale meals and was just doing incredibly, because her microbiome had managed the inflammation. Her microbiome had, the microbiome makes so many anti-cancer compounds, it's insane.
Yeah.
And so your biome is producing the fabric of life. And she ended up passing away from a heart attack some months later, not from her pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
So she is an amazing woman, and she was really the first to demonstrate the power of the earth around us, and the power of community. This dog was her community, and this dog was in some ways her connection to a much greater nature that she had become divorced from. We should already be strategizing of, what are we going to do? What are we going to do when this isolation time is over?
Yeah.
We are going to have to reconnect more aggressively to prevent the next pandemic. This pandemic is the result of species being isolated from their nature. If our response to viruses is to further isolate, we're going down the wrong path.
You make a great point. And honestly, if there's someone I would take this seriously on this with such a global pandemic, I'd be asking you. I really think that you've got, but let me ask you this. Let me play devil's advocate for a second. We're pregnant, right? She's due any day. Like, if I might be asymptomatic, she might be asymptomatic, we don't know. But if we go out and about and there's sick people around, and then we're getting sick, and then our baby's getting sick, I mean, what do we do for, how do we protect our elderly? How do we protect our pregnant women? There's so much fear, but the fear is almost like, how do I put my safety belt on with this?
Yes. And one of your comments that just came through, I missed the name on it, but the comment was that social distancing intends to make sure that our hospitals aren't overrun.
Yeah.
I know that that's the public discourse that's being, justification that's being put behind this, but we have to look more critically at that.
Yeah.
If we look at nations who have responded to SARS, MERS, and this viral pandemic as well, social isolation techniques have never changed the trajectory of the virus in the population. Mm-hmm. It always follows the same parabolic curve, and it's always within days of the same distance, meaning like for this current one, it's 42 days. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you're in Sweden where they didn't socially isolate, or the United States or Italy, it's the same 42-day parabolic curve. And so we have no evidence that social distancing has any impact on the speed at which our hospitals are overwhelmed. What we know is that this virus, like every other one, travels ubiquitously, not through just human contact. It travels through the air, travels, you know, through the ecosystem itself, and it's not absorbed through your mouth. It's absorbed through your ears, through your skin, through your sinuses, through your eyes. You know, it is. You are a sieve. You were designed to absorb viruses. That's your job. You need the genetic information from the outside world, and so there's no data that it helps our hospitals out, but we do know the 42-day curve. And of course, when you're in the steepest part of that curve, which only lasts for 2 weeks, you're going to overrun hospital systems. China, we should learn so much as the United States of this. We are not prepared because we don't think big.
Yeah.
China finished its 2 hospitals in 10 days. And so as soon as it saw a parabolic curve, they started building hospitals. And they built them from ground up. And so they finished 2 hospitals with 2,000 bed capacity in 10 days. We couldn't even get new respirators in our hospitals in 2 months. We saw it coming. We had all the warning of China and Italy and everything else, and we couldn't even get respirators in. And they're building hospitals. They built 16 hospitals in a month and some days. And so by the time they finished their last hospital 5 weeks in, they had discharged all of their patients from the first hospital. And most of those hospitals never got used because the statistics that were being put out there were wrong. They thought they were going to face 7 to 10 to 10x mortality, or 7 to 10% mortality, which is what the U.S. was being told.
Yeah.
That is not at all the science that was being put out there, but it was the result of a very erroneous test that was being put out. We should never use PCR, which is the test that's still to this day being reported on Johns Hopkins website or any CNN feed or anything else. PCR is not the way to test for a population spread of a virus. You can't tell. All you can tell by PCR is who has it in their bloodstream right this minute. But you can't tell how many people already recovered and were exposed. They still, that thing was developed over a month ago, and it still hasn't been allowed to really get out there. We need serologic testing to prove a death rate from a virus. This one already we've figured out is going to be down around 0.1%, which is what the typical influenza looks like.
Yeah.
So then you have to ask, well, if it's just like influenza and way more people are getting influenza than this virus, why are we seeing a surge of cases in the hospitals? That's an important question, and it goes a couple deep. Number one is because we induced a massive fear state. We convinced people that this was a fatal virus, and we know the power of the mind. We know that if you tell somebody they're going to die from their condition, their chance of dying from that condition goes up radically.
Yeah.
And if we had come out instead with, all right, there's a new virus, it's going to present differently than the flu. It's going to present with hypoxemia and not pneumonia. We need to be present and ready as a hospital system to treat that. Well, the doctors to this second still don't know that. They don't know that this isn't going to be respiratory failure. It's going to be hypoxemia. The treatment for hypoxemia is completely different than respiratory failure with flu. And so we're treating it wrong, therefore people are dying. Because we keep thinking it's a virus. It's not a virus. People aren't dying of the virus. People are actually surviving quite easily with the virus. What people are dying from, this is Harvard now. Harvard is showing us, and this is, we shouldn't even give credit to Harvard really. China figured it out first, but Italy proved it, and then Harvard finally comes out with their paper and gets all the credit. But basically, it's been shown now across the globe that people are dying from parts per million of air pollution, not from COVID. And so for every 1 micron of 2.5 micron particles in the air pollution is kind of this threshold for nanoparticle absorption into our lungs. For every 1 micron per cubic meter of air that goes up, the mortality from COVID goes up 20-fold. It turns out that the place that this developed in China, where we saw the highest mortality, has the most toxic air in the world. It's 20 to 40 times more toxic than New York City. But in the United States, it's New York City and Seattle and the Deep South around New Orleans that have those high particulate matter things, and that's where we saw the mortality here. In Italy, the only place that you see that kind of toxicity in the air is northern Italy, exactly where everybody died there. So we're not dying of COVID, we're dying of air pollution. The chance of dying with the number, the particle number of your air pollution is astronomically higher than the risk of dying from the virus itself. And so it really is this perfect storm. And isn't this poetic that nature would put into the environment a new genetic code that would expose our vulnerability, that would reveal the toxicity that we've created in the air?
You know, are we seeing a root cause of all this? I think one thing, you know, I nearly died of Crohn's disease. I'm sure everyone on this has been affected either family or personally by some severe chronic incurable disease, but they're told by their doctor. Are we seeing some root cause issues here with the microbiome or toxic air or what's going on with COVID that's just making us susceptible to disease? Can you illustrate what do you think is really at the root of all this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So the root of it, both as to why the virus developed and the root of why we're dying from the virus, is a molecule that we added to the environment in 1976. Okay. And that molecule is glyphosate. Glyphosate is a backbone of glycine, which is a critical amino acid necessary for human life. It's a part of almost all, you know, a huge majority or a huge minority, at least, of the proteins that we produce. And so that glycine is then modified with a phosphate group and a carboxyl group. And so we get this amine in the middle, which is a nitrogen moiety, and then we have a phosphate and carboxyl groups. And that becomes an organophosphate toxin. And we created glyphosate in 1976 as a patented weed killer called Roundup. And in the very first year that we put that on the market, and we spread it across northern U.S., southern Canada as the very first place that got broad spraying of Roundup. Within days, May of 1976, we saw the very first species jump of a virus. It was a swine flu that developed in May of 1976. And so within minutes of a broad spectrum antibiotic in the form of a weed killer, we created the first, species shift of viruses. And so since then, we've had 12,800 cases of this jump from species to species of this genetic stress that we would call a virus. So we create genetic stress through killing the microbiome, and we do that nowhere greater than the agricultural system. If you look at Hubei province and in particular around Wuhan, the epicenter of this whole epidemic, that epicenter is the highest spraying territory of all of China. And so you overlap the highest spraying of microbial death or microbial stress with the air pollution map of China, and you can pinpoint to about a 50-mile radius where this virus was going to start.
Wow.
And I shared that data at last year at Sun Valley Wellness Festival. I showed them the maps. I showed them where the next virus would come from. I had no idea it was going to happen in a few months, but I knew it was going to have to be in that zone because of the pressure we were putting on it from our agricultural system as well as our air pollution systems. I didn't have any idea that air pollution was going to actually cause the mortality piece of this, which I think is fascinating. But I knew that the vulnerability was there in the microbiome, because you don't have to be very intelligent to figure that out. You just Google China spraying map of glyphosate. If you look in the U.S., interestingly, if you overlap the high pollution with the glyphosate spraying map, you get northeast around New York, you get deep south around Louisiana, and you get northwest up around Seattle and Oregon. And so those are our three hot spots in this country of death toll. And so we know glyphosate is playing a very important role in this vulnerability.
It seems like that's kind of one of the root cause issues with everything going on. If the glyphosate, this broad spectrum antibiotic basically, is also in, I'm saying here, I read in one of your statements that it's in 70% of our rainwater here in the United States. So
yeah, 75%. 75% of the rainfall, 75% of our air we breathe. It's a water-soluble toxin. And so on a planet that's 70% water, that grows plants that are 70% water, that grows humans that are 70% water, a water-soluble toxin is insane. But that's what we've put in. At 4.5 billion pounds a year now, we're spraying this chemical into our water systems. And so it is the most ubiquitous toxin on the planet. And so when you talk about public health and the chronic disease explosion that we saw right after 1996, when we genetically modified our crops to be sprayed directly with glyphosate, we became glyphosate-carrying entities just like the plants did. Somebody just texted correctly here on Instagram saying that human breast milk has glyphosate in it. It does, just like our urine does, just like our bloodstream does, just like our feces does. Every compartment within the human body has it. Unfortunately, in those breast milk studies that were funded by Moms Across America, they actually showed levels as much as 1,600 times as much as that is allowed in drinking water in breast milk. And so, unfortunately, it looks like the human body not only absorbs it, we're able to do something that the chemical companies have been swearing to the EPA doesn't happen. It's called bioaccumulation. But we do look like we can bioaccumulate this toxin and store it at higher levels than we're actually exposed to. So it's a little terrifying. What happens if you're a fetus in the world today? And I know you're about to bring a child into the world, and I'm so excited for you and your wife. And
Thank you.
Sounds terrifying. But the silver lining here is that child is so much more resilient at the spiritual level, at the soul level, at the biologic level than any toxin we've ever invented. I have seen patients overcome the most extreme toxicity with positive mindset, with hope and joy and love and a sense of beauty. That is the silver lining, is we are not biologic creatures. We are energetic creatures. We are spiritual beings that can transcend the toxicity that we've created. And that's the excitement we have in my clinic, is we see the downstream consequences of toxicity every single day. Every single patient walking in has some version of it. Our message to them first is, hello, you are here, and so am I, and we're two human beings with sole purpose that showed up right now. There's 7 billion people on the planet, and 2 people showed up in the same room at the same time. Whoa, this is amazing. This is a miracle moment just because we're in the same room at the same time, alive at the same moment, 200,000 years of human history. And so that is so cool. And at that moment, you can overcome the cancer that's in their body or the disease that's in their lung with a sense of purpose and a sense of deep-driven spiritual truth and power that can transmute toxins, that can transmute this. And so your hands on the belly of your wife, and with that pregnant belly, transmute the toxicity that we've created for that child with just sheer beauty.
When the sun rises, so does opportunity. And we all have the option to say, I can. And when we say I can, that changes at a cellular level. You know, we see it time and time again with quantum physics, with manifestation, that our minds can change us. If we believe something bad happened to the world, what happens to us? We curl up on a ball, we cry, we don't want to eat, our bowels go to crap. You know, when we think the great things are happening, all of a sudden we're rising, we're growing. When we think we're going to die and we don't even have cancer, but we think we have cancer, look, we're seeing the placebo effect of actually dying of cancer go way, way up. And so healing truly starts in the mind. And when you focus on abilities to create, the fog clears and solutions come your way. So if I'm an average person out there and I want to fix my microbiome, I want to fix that cellular signaling to help it start working correctly and fight glyphosate, how can Ion Biome help fight this tremendous, huge beast called glyphosate? And how can it help heal root cause of all disease to empower the body?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Yeah, you know, concept in that, you know, the communication network that we're pulling out of fossil soil is the antidote for Roundup. That was our discovery in 2014.
Yep.
We were trying to figure out why it was having an effect on
so
many different systems.
Right? You guys were able to clinically prove its ability to fight glyphosate. So this is not just talk.
This isn't theoretical. This literally happens in 3 minutes under the microscope. You can see cell systems reorganize themselves, tight junctions re-express. You see complex matrices of large architecture of not just one human cell, but billions of human cells coordinating their behavior again. And that's within minutes of exposure to the communication network. And so that's how this compound has become so radical in so many areas. It's the first dietary supplement that's designed not to do anything. Literally, we put it out to be a benign signal magnifier. And so just like the cell phone tower has never initiated a phone call, but your cell phone is useless without the cell phone tower. So we are simply putting the cell phone tower back between the human cells so that they can communicate once again. And once that communication network is up, the rate at which protein synthesis and repair happens is mind-blowing. It happens so much faster than we've ever been told in any biologic history class, because we've always studied human biology in a sterile petri dish without any communication network. And so when we first put this into human cells, it was mind-blowing what was going on. It didn't make any sense how healthy cells could figure out which were cancer cells, could figure out, you know, where they were oriented in 3 dimensions. Like, this has never been seen in a sterile petri dish because we didn't think beyond the human system. We thought that human redox signaling from mitochondria, which aren't even human, was how cells communicated. But of course, it's the microbiome that outnumbers us 100 to 1, is creating the ecosystem, you know, communication network that allows us to create a coordinate repair system. And so the first thing that repairs when you swallow that liquid is your gut integrity improves. And so you start expressing tight junctions. And of course, the compound's not telling it to do that. The cells are telling each other, we need more protection. So it increases tight junction expression. If you then damage it with Roundup, it expresses proteins even faster. We can now take Roundup 20,000 times as much as you would see in your daily activities, and you still can repair faster. And so what Mother Nature is showing us is that 60 million years ago, right before the last great extinction, that's why we go back in the archaeologic time, is because you want soil that predated the last extinction event. We have never recovered microbial diversity to the same degree yet. But I think we can help create that through regenerative agriculture. I think we can create 60-million-year-old ecosystems. And so all the money we make from this dietary supplement line, we put back into our nonprofit and our other companies that are trying to innovate around root cause solutions to create a verdant earth. We can create the Garden of Eden again. We can create a environment that is so vibrant and beyond our current concept of biodiversity if we will participate in this.
When I was reading about it, I thought, how does the correlation with the microbiome really, combine with the cell-to-cell redox system?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one thing I just really couldn't figure out, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel that way.
Yeah. So you can imagine how disrupted my concept of the world has been over the last 10 years. So if you'd met me 10 years ago and we'd done an Instagram live, there probably wasn't Instagram live then. Anyways, I've lost track of my IT timeline. But
yep.
The fact is, if we had talked 10 years ago, I was developing chemotherapy at the University of Virginia. So I've gone from that mindset of I need to kill everything, from the bacteria in your body to your cancer cells I need to kill. So that was the mindset that we were trained into. So I was in academia for 17 years in different sectors. And now you fast forward 10 years, and now I recognize that everything is working for the best and the highest good.
Yeah.
Everything is there to be a part of this extraordinary tapestry of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you ask, how does a redox signaling move beyond just helping gut or vascular or blood-brain or kidney tubules combine back together? We've shown all of those in the laboratories with ion, but how does ion or that communication network inform microbial species to coordinate their behavior? And the new science that's coming out of the fungal world, if you haven't seen Paul Stamets's work, please, go search him out. It will blow your mind. If you think I'm interesting, Paul Stamets will absolutely, blow your mind.
Zach, if he blows your mind, he's going to be speaking a different language that no one on this call understands, okay? And that's why I like talking to you, because you can put it in a term where I go, oh, wait, I caught what he said, and he actually knows what he's talking about all at once. I'm telling you, man, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, dude. You've got the skill. You are the one. You are the Jedi. Okay, keep going.
Very good. So there's a new movie out on Paul Stamets' work. If you don't want to read the complexity of his work, it's called Magical Fungi or Fantastic Fungi.
Fantastic Fungi. Okay.
Yeah, Fantastic Fungi is the movie. It's being released in small theaters right now, and I think you can watch it online now. You can stream it. But Fantastic Fungi gets at what you're asking, which is how do diverse and seemingly disparate parts of the microbiome communicate, and why?
Mm-hmm.
And why perhaps is where we start. The why species want to communicate is to achieve something called quorum sensing, which is freaking cool.
Yeah.
And quorum sensing is the phenomenon where if you get enough microbial life talking to one another spontaneously, you get hyperintelligence. We can't measure any volitional or intelligent response at the single bacterial level or at a single element of a yeast. But if you put that into a diverse ecosystem or enough volume of life and it communicates, it starts to behave in a hyper-intelligent fashion. You can see this in trees, for example. A single tree alone is actually very vulnerable. But if you allow mycelial connection to other tree species, they start to do quorum sensing. And this can happen within a single species. For example, in the African environment, there's these groves of trees that grow in the desert, and they have to grow in a very specific fashion to support themselves through drought and flooding during the rainy season and everything else. So they have to grow in a very specific way. And the main threat to them is actually giraffe, which can come and just completely denude the entire grove instantaneously by plucking all the leaves off. And so the quorum sensing has developed such that if they're connected by a microbial network of mycelium, the fungi, then when a giraffe comes and starts eating the leaves of a single tree, when it's consumed about 15% of the leaves off that tree, the tree sends out a signal, and all of its other leaves and all of the leaves of the smaller trees in the grove start producing an acid that the giraffes hate. And so then the giraffes, tasting that acid shift, they know that now that every tree in the grove tastes terrible. And so they don't even bother trying anything else, and they move to the next stand. And so this brilliant technique of trees speaking through fungi to communicate this hyper-intelligent shift in their genetic response to the environment, where they start to make a new protein and acid shift and all this happens. That's what the microbe is trying to do in your gut all the time. So when you put a teaspoon or a tablespoon of ion into your gut, it's trillions of these redox signaling molecules per drop. I mean, it's this mind-boggling amount of communication capacity. And as it sweeps through your gut, it's certainly helping cell signaling in the human cells, achieve their repair. But at a deeper level, you're allowing the microorganisms of your gut, 30,000 species of bacteria, you got parasites, fungi, 5 million species, who knows. You got all of this species life that in and of themselves don't help you out. But when they start to coordinate behavior, then they act like a body in and of themselves.
Okay, so what you're saying is this communication network, the redox system found in ion biome, it acts as a cell-to-cell signaler, but that also allows a connection to happen with the microbiome, and specifically the fungi, which have an ability to, in that speaking, be able to empower the body to be able to work in its divine synergistic way. So you're saying the communication network of it can allow not just cell-to-cell communication, but bacteria or fungi to cell communication?
That's right. And even cooler than that, we're now showing very clearly in the lab that you can actually get the mitochondria into the conversation. Wow. So mitochondria live inside of the human cells, and they're these weird little bugs. There's 3 different species of these bacteria-like creatures that live inside a human cell. And the 3 species of mitochondria, we don't actually even know why. We don't know why there's 3 species. We don't know how they really differ from one another other than their genetics. Yeah. We don't know what different purposes they play in the function of the human cell. But we know a human cell can't survive for a split second without the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. A single cell, if you look at a biology textbook, is going to show you that there's 2 or 3 mitochondria. If there were 2 or 3 mitochondria, we would die instantaneously. We would never be born. Mm-hmm. The average human cell has 200 mitochondria. A human neuron has 2,000 mitochondria in it when we're healthy. After about age 2 now, there's enough toxicity in our environment that our mitochondrial density is dropping. And so we're seeing an accelerated aging in the population because of the destruction of mitochondrial reserve. Mitochondria, like bacteria, can proliferate. Mm-hmm. But they have to have the right environment, and they have to have a low toxicity state. And so these mitochondria, we now know through the same redox signaling of the microbiome, are communicating back to the microbiome. And it would have to be that way because the microbiome is actually feeding the mitochondria. Remember, on your plate, you've got protein, fat, and carbohydrates, none of which can help a human cell. The human cell has no way of turning any of that into energy. Instead, the microbiome has to digest that into biodiverse and bioavailable nutrients that are repackaged by your liver, put out into the bloodstream, absorbed through a capillary wall, into a cell system, through a cell wall, into the cytoplasm. The mitochondria then chew up either a fatty acid or a sugar molecule, glucose or galactose, and we'll turn it into the exact same molecule in one enzyme step. They'll turn it into acyl-CoA, and then the next enzyme turns it into acetyl-CoA. And so in 2 steps, the microbiome of your mitochondria will convert fat and sugar into the exact same molecule. And so all this debate over should you eat fat, should you eat sugar, carbs, no carbs, whatever, it's a stupid argument because they're all turned into the same thing. All you have to really ask is, does the type of carbohydrate you eat cause stress on its way to a mitochondria?
How does the mitochondria communicate with the outside world of the bacteria?
Through the carbon redox. So in ion, you got
the carbon redox found in ion biome.
Yeah, so these carbon molecules are very stable, and that's different than the redox signaling made out of mitochondria. Mitochondria talk to each other and to the human nucleus through redox signaling of oxygen compounds. And so these include things like ozone, which is O3, or hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, or superoxides, or another example is a unique molecule called HO2. It's the opposite of H2O. But these molecules are very short-lived. They last for about a millionth of a second in nature. And so as soon as they're produced by the mitochondria, they're used up in the electrical transit of information through the intracellular environment. In contrast, the microbiome, not having the security and safety of the inside of the cell environment, where its pH is controlled, osmolality is controlled, glucose levels controlled, like it is the most controlled environment you can possibly imagine inside a human cell. The bacteria don't have that luxury. They have to pass from maybe your mouth to the pH of 3.2 in your stomach, which is battery acid, to the pH of 8.8 in your small intestine. So their environment is constantly in flux. And so their communication network had to develop such that it had stability in all these environments. So that's been the unique thing about ION, is we're taking a communication network that's stable in diverse environments. And those tiny carbon molecules don't need metabolism. They're actually made by the bacteria and fungi when they consume food. Redox signaling is the result of metabolism, the result of turning food into energy.
The takeaway here is we need a redox system that our body can use to communicate between each part of it, right? Now, will that help create diversity within the body? Can that, so if we have, because it sounds like, we're out here, can 1 billion CFUs of this tiny one bacteria of 50,000, 100,000, who knows, parasite and fungi and bacteria. It sounds like with that redox system, it can duplicate itself to cultivate into the billions or trillions. And can it also help create more diversity in the gut? Because that's one of the biggest problems with antibiotic use, which pretty much everyone here has used, because we've maxed out the usage of antibiotics on human patients.
Yeah. And I think this is so eloquent, is there is no bacteria or fungi that wants to dominate the environment, which I think is really eloquent. Each bacteria and fungi, when given an unfettered access to information, knows that it plays a niche within an ecosystem. It doesn't own the ecosystem. Nature abhors monopolies, and it also abhors a vacuum. And so what we've created in the ICU experience in the hospital is a vacuum. There is no life. We try to kill life as soon as it rears its head. And so in that environment, you're going to see the rise of a few species that have become super resilient to our toxicity. So therefore, the Clostridium difficile that you mentioned, the C. diff, or BRE or MRSA, or any of these acronym drug-resistant bugs starts to crop up. But they don't want to be a dominant species. They're trying to create the foundation for life, and they're trying to create the matrix. And so they're creating communication network in and of themselves to try to diversify. And we respond by saying, oh my gosh, there's MRSA in that room. We need to kill it with more alcohol, with more antibiotic. We need to go annihilate it again. We do the same thing in holistic medicine too, and it drives me crazy. There's this whole fad right now of Lyme disease going on. So we're diagnosing Lyme disease in patients that test completely negative for Lyme. That drives me crazy. But more importantly, we keep blaming the Lyme organism as if it's responsible for the syndrome. The syndrome is chronic fatigue, chronic pain, slow muscle recovery, poor sleep quality, poor sex drive, and then we say, oh, you must have chronic Lyme. That's ridiculous, because it's, again, damning a microbial system that's never trying to do harm to a system. It's only trying to return it. If you do have Lyme in your system, you should check out Google. You can Google Lyme spirochete in human tissue. And if you've ever seen an infection on your skin or in a petri dish, it's overwhelming expansion of a single species. That's what infection looks like. It takes over the entire petri dish. What happens when you see Lyme in human tissue is it's a single organism, a single little spirochete spiraling between human cells, as if grazing between the cells, with no evidence of damage behind it. There's no cellular damage, there's no inflammation, it's benignly passing through. And so when I showed this at the International Lyme Conference, my point was, it was like a 4-hour lecture, so I don't want to bore you with this Lyme issue, but the point is, Lyme is not a disease. Lyme is a microbial element that has very important niche within a complex ecosystem. Its important niche happens to be that it can digest sulfur compounds. We can only digest carbon compounds. Fat and sugar are both carbon compounds. That's why they both turn into acetyl-CoA as soon as it goes into a mitochondria. In contrast, the Lyme spirochete is what we call a chemoheterotroph. So they can use lots of different things on the periodic chart for fuel production. And most specifically, these sulfur compounds that accumulate because we have herbicides and pesticides in our diet. we created the need for lime in our bodies by ingesting so much sulfur compounds that we can't digest, and so they become waste product and they store up in our bodies. And so we have to call in not just lime spirochetes, but many different spirochetes. The average mouth flora in your mouth have dozens of species of spirochetes, not just lime. The spirochete over in Europe that causes Lyme disease is not even the same species of spirochete. And so we have to stop blaming these organisms as if they're the problem. They are simply responding to a toxic environment, and they're trying to create adaptation, detoxification, and support.
And so these redox systems and ion biome can help create that root cause signaling to allow the diversity. And because of the lack of diversity, maybe some of these bugs are overreacting in a toxic environment. And so it seems like the name of the game for long-term health is connection, biodiversity, having proper signaling between cell to cell, cell to fungi, cell to bacteria. So tetrahydrite can help do that from 60-million-year-old soil from the desert that's completely sterile. Can it hurt anyone? Can ion biome, if someone's super sick, one of my clients, it got her colon removed 25 years ago, been on antibiotics for 25 plus years, almost chronically, lots of trauma, stuff like that. Can someone who's been through a lot, can they get a reaction? Can they get a Herx reaction? I know you talk a lot about Herx in your lectures. And is there any way that they can take too much? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so lots there to digest. So on the front end, we can talk about vulnerable individuals, and vulnerable individuals are never the ones that I expect. And so vulnerable is not the right word, sensitive.
Yeah.
So you've got sensitive individuals that are going to respond really dramatically to a little bit of information. Okay. And so typically those ones happen to be the people that have had long-term exposure to antibiotic environment and those that have been on probiotics a long time. And so both antibiotics and probiotics suppress biodiversity. And so if you are in a very suppressed biodiverse environment, you know that your cell phone towers have been down for a while, probably years. And so in those patients that are coming to my clinic who have been diagnosed with chronic Lyme and were put on 16 years of antibiotics, which I see on a routine basis, it should be illegal. And they come in with just no cell phone tower running for years and years, and so they have a very isolated cellular system. If you would put them on ion at a high, or reasonable, typical usage of it, you're going to see a dramatic event happen because every cell needs repair. And so the amount of energy demand on their system suddenly, when they suddenly realize that all hell is broken loose and every cell needs a repair, process to be kicked into high gear, it's too much too fast, and you can see them crash. So they can develop, fatigue and headache, and all of their Lyme symptoms or whatever it is come back. What you've just pushed too hard on the accelerator pedal of repair, and so you need to match your kind of input of information with their metabolic reserve. Patients that we typically say are going to be sensitive to any communication network, that you put in there is going to be your Lyme patients who have been on chronic antibiotics, or your autistic community. Your autism kids are a very narrow microecosystem, therefore they have neurologic syndrome. And so those are going to be very sensitive. So for those patients, we'll just start on 1 or 2 drops of the liquid, which again are trillions of molecules, but you're at 1 and 2 drops a day. You can add it to water, and you just start there and let your gut start to get into the groove and not overly demand the repair system. Remember, the compound doesn't do anything, so there's no toxicity. It's actually the safest soil extract ever. There's a lot of other things that are out there, fulvic acids, humic acids. There's, diatomaceous earth was mentioned earlier on this. None of those, diatomaceous earth actually isn't a soil compound. It's microorganisms from the ocean, so it's little tiny shells of microorganisms from water. That's totally different. But in the humic acid and fulvic acid category, those are very acidic, and they're very oxidative. And so if you put that in the gut, you can definitely overdose. And your humic acids in particular are loaded with mineral content that can be oxidative. Mm-hmm. Mineral resources have to be organified. They have to be processed through a bacteria before they're not toxic to the human body.
Okay.
Things like calcium, manganese, minerals like this need to either be taken up by a plant or microorganism before we can make them bioavailable to us and before they become non-oxidative. And so we've taken these soil extracts through a digestive process or a reactive catalyst process to get the oxygen-hydrogen binding on those soil compounds again. So it differs from anything else on the market from just a safety standpoint. So we can actually measure the toxicity of water on renal tubule cells at 20% concentrations. Not only are we safe at 20% concentrations, we extend the life of proximal renal tubules by 10 to 15% at 20% concentrations. If you take that further, we've now grown proximal renal tubule cells, which is the most sensitive cell in the body, in 100% of ion. And so you don't even need anything else. You can just grow cells within this communication network, which is a beautiful story of how life happens. Life happens within a three-dimensional, four-dimensional matrix of understanding of where each species belongs, where each cell type belongs. You mentioned earlier just a miraculous phenomenon, which is when you cut yourself, your skin repairs.
Yep.
But it's even more mind-blowing that your skin knows where its boundary is at. Mm-hmm. How does your skin know that the limit of your skin should be right there?
Yeah.
That means that the information stream that the cell is actually being obedient to is actually in the energy field, not in the biology. The biology is finding a form within the energy field to know where a human body should sit.
Wow.
And we prove this in kidneys. We can show with a 1 micron slice of human kidney, put it into ion biome, and we can see it start to rebuild a three-dimensional structure in a petri dish. So even that tiny slice of human kidney knows its three-dimensional structure somehow. Wow. And so there is something really mysterious about the interface between energy, water, and the microbiome, and that's life.
Wow, that is so cool. And I remember you talked once about how cells even communicate is through light energy, and it's actually like a lens on a camera that is focusing in and out that allows that connection. And maybe so we're seeing that light energy transferred, and that genetic code or that light, that there's data in the energy. You know,
that's right.
And
that's right.
You can't. That's beyond science. That's a wave that you just ride. I mean, that's part of it. Like, hey, the universe is expanding, and you've got an energy field, and those are just two things that are just in print. You know, go ahead and digest that.
These are fundamental truths.
Yeah, and so tetrahydrate, the redox system can massively help in those, and can help with all the really root cause issue. You're really painting a great picture of how that happens. I want to turn a little bit now to food. We've got this thing now where how can food truly help us? If our, what's going on with our soils, and how can food, and like, what are some foods right now? I know we have the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15, but are there any specific foods where you say that will help that? And I actually forgot to ask you there, I don't know if we want this in the side note, but is there any other supplement or food or anything that you would say could help someone start to take on tetrahydrate to help it go better or faster, anything that helps that process?
Yeah, great question. A couple of approaches to the food that we use in clinic all the time is if you've got a really damaged gut in particular, start with really well-cooked foods. And so raw vegetables can be brutal on a damaged gut. And it has to do with the fiber in there. And so if you have a leaky gut, the insoluble fibers in kale can be very inflammatory. And that's actually was my life journey to finding ion. I started a plant-based vegan clinic in the middle of rural Virginia in one of the food deserts there. And I was convinced that if I just got enough kale into everybody, all their diseases would go away.
Nope.
And a third of them, that happened. A third of them, it was like miraculous. It was like, whoa, like everything was better in a month. Like the speed was mind-boggling. A third of them were like, okay, a little bit of improvement over time. And a third of them got worse. And it was that category. After 2 years of working with these patients, of course, for the first year, I just said, well, they must be not doing what I'm telling them to do. They're probably eating Twinkies. And so it was this lack of trust on my side, and ultimately there was a disrespect that I had been trained as a physician. We are trained, sadly, to disrespect our patients. Yeah. Not to trust their mindset, not to trust their conviction for health, not to trust their behavior. And so after a year of getting to know these patients to the point where, for the first time being a primary care doctor where I was 100% responsible for 100% of my patients, that had never happened in a hospital system. We are not responsible for anybody. We take small bits of opportunity to bill for patients, to give them some information, but we're never really responsible. As a rural doctor, you literally are the stopping point here. And so in that experience, I ended up starting to really get to know patients really well. And in that journey, started to trust them. And in that trust, they taught me that I was wrong about kale, and that it's not the food that makes for health. It's the way in which the body processes that food that makes for health. And so these patients in rural Virginia, in a terribly processed food desert, they were not ready for kale. A lot of them were going to get increased inflammation because they didn't have a microbiome, and they had profound leaky gut from the sheer amount of glyphosate they were consuming in this raw environment.
Yep.
And that they were leaking sieve. And so the insoluble fiber in kale was acting as it shot through the gut lining inappropriately right into their immune system. It was creating an inflammatory response. And so for anybody who has chronic, I think somebody just mentioned they have UC and kale bothers them.
Yeah, we got a lot of UC people on this call.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you have a damaged colon, you're going to be very prone to sensitivity to fiber. Yep. And so for those patients, I usually start with like a long grain rice boiled for a very long time.
Yeah.
This is called congee in a lot of Indian culture and stuff like that. And so congee is a great pudding that's made from long boiled rice, and it helps break down the fibers to a point where your damaged gut can handle it. Mm-hmm. And so congee is like my go-to for those guts that are just completely annihilated and you have to restart from scratch. Congee is a good place. Then you want to go to well-cooked, vegetables, and starting at the root vegetables is smarter than starting at the high level of the alkaloids that you see in the cruciferous vegetables like kale and Brussels sprouts. Mm-hmm. That's too much. You don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. And so start down in the root system, which makes sense because we're trying to rebuild your soil. So start at the roots. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to start with things like beets that have been steamed and boiled for a good long time. You'll start with turnips. You'll start with sweet potatoes. Start in the root vegetable categories and let the starches there be the beginning. Starch has to be the building block towards fiber. Mm. And so start with good starch sources, your rices and your potatoes being good examples. And then you move towards, getting above the soil then with some of your greens. But again, if you're going to start eating kale, make sure you cook that kale down. I would prefer you start with something like a collard green that doesn't have the same level of alkaloid, which is the medicine in the food. You want alkaloids eventually, but you can't just start there. And so, work your way up the hierarchy towards the sunlight. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, the sunlight is what you're trying to convert everything to, because the mitochondria that I talked about actually don't make food for you. They produce ATP, but the only reason they make ATP is so they can make light energy on the way to ATP. Mm. And so you're literally turning all your food into light energy, which is fantastically beautiful. Wow. And so you are a light machine. And the amount of energy you create at the light level is mind-boggling. Some good science in the last couple of years suggests that a cubic centimeter of mitochondria can make 10,000 times more light energy than a cubic centimeter of the surface of the sun.
Whoa.
You are a solar explosion. You are so much energy, and you're not tapped into it because you have a belief of viruses, and you have a belief of pandemics, and you have a belief of cancer, and you have a belief of all of this disease. You have a belief of aging. Yeah, so we're layered with all of this, decay in our mindset, a belief of destruction. And so at this point, I think it's very exciting for us to start to say, if we are light energy, 10,000 times brighter than the sun, what are we going to do with that energy? What are we going to do when we get to quorum sense? And that's the challenge we now have. In 2 weeks, you're going to hear from the government, oh, we were totally wrong. Nobody needs to social distance. You all can go back to your work. Let's get the economy going again. Sorry about that. And we're going to go right back to what? And so this is our moment. We have to quorum sense right now on the human level for the first time. Easy enough to take Terrahydrate and get your gut going. That's actually a relatively easy journey.
Yeah.
Much more exciting and much more challenging now is how, as single human organisms, do we communicate with 7 billion other cells? And so in our moment of singularity, in our moment of synchronicity, we are rehearsing the future for those that will become awake. And I'm honored to be among all of you. Unfortunately, I got another thing coming up on my schedule here, but I am just so honored to be among you. And I'm just grateful to you, Dane, for your journey towards health, your story of personal transformation through food, through connection to nature, through connection to human beings. I think that your audience has been as much a part of your healing journey as your body has. You decided to connect to an audience in your journey, and most of us will retract away from people when we are sick. And so I just honor you for making the decision, which is a courageous one, to reach out in your frailty and in your most vulnerable moments and decide you're going to take people on a journey with you. And so thank you for doing that. Honored to be with you, and looking forward to the next time we're together.